What up, Facebook? This is my review of The Center Cannot Hold by Elyn R. Sachs. So, um, what this book is about courage, transparency, and mental illness. It's a memoir by someone living and growing up with schizophrenia. And it's very intense at times. She talks about the early stages, and she talks about the misconceptions behind schizophrenia. So, for instance, I always thought schizophrenia was having multiple personalities, hearing multiple voices. But actually, what schizophrenia is, as she explains it, is a state of psychosis where you experience different things like an altered reality. Your reality kind of melts away and enters this horror state. So she talks about how when she would slip into these states of psychosis, she'd be sitting in her room and she'd feel like there'd be people watching her or the walls were closing in. Things that they weren't voices, basically. They were inciting terror. They were living nightmares, as she described them. But what this book really does is show her perseverance. And it also, even though not a lot of, well, I don't want to say not a lot of people viewing this may have this mental illness, but it opens a door, opens a window to how someone that has a flaw or has something, a personality or a trait that they may view as a flaw, and they may fight to hide it or fight to not accept it. So it is very relatable how she talks about how she fights with this feeling of not wanting to be medicated. A large portion of her life, she was on antipsychosis medication, and she always tried to whittle herself down, and it would lead to very negative living nightmares for her because her body just couldn't function properly. It couldn't focus without these medications, but she felt that every time she took the medication, she was showing weakness. And I think that's very relatable for people, even if you do not have schizophrenia, that you may not want to receive help or may not want to admit to having something because it shows you're weak. As someone that has struggled through a small mental mishap in my life, I know that feeling of not wanting to admit, not wanting to be open about, hey, I suffer from depression, or hey, I suffer from anxiety. Not a lot of people want to show that side of themselves. They want to be strong. I feel a lot of people, especially in society, they want to be strong and they want people to view them as strong people. She also kind of tackles the stigma of having a mental illness. She talked about in her career, because she's a very, first of all, this book received many awards. It was on a lot of bestsellers. It is a fantastic book, and it deserves all the accolades it has received. But she's a very successful woman in herself. She's received various degrees. She is a tenured professor. She gave a TED Talk that received over millions of views on YouTube. Her research and life is dedicated to the arena of mental illnesses, and she wants to fight this stigma that people with a mental illness, one, it's obvious. So if someone has a mental illness, it's labeled across the forehead, which isn't true. She talks about a lot how about in her undergrad and her graduate years, she would really try to hold it together in front of people, and then she would just release when she was either talking to her psychoanalyst, someone she would really confide in, or if she was just home alone, she would just release everything, and it wasn't a healthy feeling for her. So she really wanted to remove this stigma that if you have a mental illness, one, that it's easy to detect, and two, that it means you can't function normally in society. Now, I'm not trying to say that everyone with schizophrenia has the same success in her life, because that's just not true. The statistics just don't lend to that fact, unfortunately. But it's not a death sentence. It's not a death sentence away from a happy life. People are able to function with mental illnesses. people able to be contributing members of society, and not just on a standard level. I'm just gonna work a 9 to 5 job, and people contribute to their society. They lead to many scientific breakthroughs and research breakthroughs. So she really is trying to fight the stigma with this book. And what is really inspirational, she talks about how through this book, when she really became public, she didn't want to write under a pseudonym. She wanted her name to be on it. And she really wanted people to know what she was going through in her life. And it inspired others and gave others courage to do it at a point where it is very risky to do that. Say you're in your undergrad or you're applying to jobs and you just walk up and say, hey, I have suffered with mental illness in my life. That was very risky. She mentions in her book that when applying to law schools and when applying to various jobs postgraduate, she would find a way to step around admitting that she had a mental illness because of the stigma behind it. She didn't want to be labeled as the professor teaching law with mental illness. So I think she does a fantastic job in this book of doing that, and I've rambled on for too long, so I apologize. She does a great job of leading us into her thoughts, into her head. And she's very clear and succinct as a writer. And I think she does a great job of describing experiences that may not be relatable to anybody. She talks about these terrifying experiences of being restrained with belts in a mental hospital and being given medications via injections against her will. So I highly suggest picking up this book. She's an amazing author, and she has an amazing story to tell of her life. And I'll just conclude with who I think this will be really beneficial for is if you've ever been curious about mental illness or have any misconceptions. So for instance, when I mentioned that schizophrenia is not multiple voices talking to you, if you're like, oh my goodness, I had no idea, which is what my consensus was while reading this, I would suggest you pick it up and explore this different viewpoint, or this fact. It's just a fact in how her mind worked. And if you yourself have a mental illness and you're not necessarily in a point in your life where you feel that you can really talk about it openly, I think this book will give you a lot of strength and a lot of courage. Or if someone you love or someone you know has a mental illness, I think reading this will definitely give a lot of insight into what they may be going through on a daily basis. It may not be exactly, but I think it's something that at least gives you enough to understand and put yourself in their shoes somewhat. So I think this book is amazing, and I highly suggest you go and pick it up. Like I said, it is titled The Center Cannot Hold by Elyn R. Sachs. Amazing book. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message. If you have any suggestions for books for me to read, let me know. If not, peace and blessings. Keep on reading and expanding your horizons. All right, y'all. Take care. Oh, and a Happy New Year. I don't know if I'm going to do a video in the next couple days. So Happy New Year to everyone. I hope you all have a great 2017. And I know everyone's down about 2016, especially with the numerous deaths that has occurred in the past year. But I just hope that everyone can remain positive and have a good outlook on their days and can express gratitude even when the days are darkest. So, like I said, peace and blessings, and take care.